Hello guys, welcome back to Annie Narrates. Here we review stories that beautiful people like yourselves post on the internet. Today's story's title goes like this. Nephew wonders why his siblings don't want a relationship with him all his life. So I sit him down on his 18th and tell him his parents' secret, and now they're all mad at me because he wants nothing to do with them. My brother and his wife are furious at me for telling my nephew certain things about them and making him see their true colors. I still feel like I did the right thing and protected him from a lot of pain and hurt. But everybody seems to think that I am in the wrong here, and I just need to vent out and get some clarity. So a little backstory. My younger brother Matthew, male 40, was in a relationship with Rachel, who was his high school sweetheart. They dated for a few years and they ended up having my nephew. Let's call him Mitchell, who just turned 18 about a week ago. They were pretty young when they had Mitchell and weren't married. Their relationship wasn't perfect either. Matthew wasn't really interested in being an involved father. You could call him a manchild. He took things too casually and didn't seem to want to bear the responsibility of having a kid. They eventually ended their relationship even before Mitchell's first birthday. I am 4 years older than Matthew, and I have loved my nephew from the minute I saw him on the day he was born. Since Matthew was such a slacker when it came to being a father, my parents and I did everything we could to help out with the baby. Naturally, we got extremely attached to each other. I also grew close to Rachel. I tried to babysit whenever I could, helped her out with the rent, bought toys and clothes for the baby, and tried to support Rachel as much as I could. Which wasn't easy because I was working 2 jobs at the same time and barely had time to do anything. Matthew hardly visited. He barely even contributed anything to help take care of the child. He didn't have a fixed job, nor did it look like he even cared to get one. I would often lend him money and try to get him job interviews in the hope that he would get his act together and be there for his son, but all in vain. Money was tight for all of us. We were living paycheck to paycheck, but we made sure that Mitchell had everything that he needed. He may not have had the fanciest of clothes or the newest toys, but he was a happy baby. Rachel was extremely worried about the financial situation. She wanted to make sure that Mitchell had sufficient money to go to college, and even though he was just a few months old, she started a savings bank account. She made sure that no matter how bad the money situation was, she would add $100 to that account every month. My parents, along with Rachel's parents, also decided that they would add $100 every month for as long as they could. All of this money would then be given to Mitchell when he turned 18. The money was mainly to help him pay for college and any other essential expenses he may have down the line. Matthew was also asked to contribute to this time and time again. It was the least that he could do. Since he wasn't really being a parent, but as usual, he didn't really bother to do anything. He did, however, get into a relationship with another girl called Julie, female 38. Julie was aware of Mitchell, but didn't really bother to get to know him, nor did she push Matthew to introduce him to her. Rachel was a good mother. She loved her baby boy, and she sacrificed so much to make sure that he was getting the best life he could. Unfortunately, she passed away just before his 2nd birthday in a horrific car accident, and I blame myself for it. She had asked me the morning of the accident if I could babysit Mitchell in the evening because she had an extra shift and the daycare was closing early. I also had some important work that day and told her that I couldn't. That was the last time that I spoke to her. The next thing I heard was that she was hit by a drunk driver while rushing to the daycare in the evening. My heart broke. I genuinely felt like it was my fault. If only I had agreed to take care of Mitchell, none of this would have happened. My heart also broke for Mitchell. Not only did he lose his mother, he had a useless father. The future looked very uncertain for all of us. Matthew was engaged to Julie by now, and they were living together. I could tell that the news of Rachel's death had shocked them both. They actually showed some real emotion at the funeral and even cried. It seemed like this horrible thing had been a reality check for Matthew. None of us expected Rachel to die, and none of us were prepared to deal with the aftermath of it. Mitchell stayed with my parents and me temporarily. Matthew seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and started making some positive changes in his life. The responsibility of raising Mitchell now lay completely with him, and he couldn't afford to slack off anymore. He got a permanent job and surprisingly started visiting Mitchell. It was like he was a new person, and all of us were surprised to see it, especially me. The only person who showed any kind of animosity during this time was Julie. One evening, Matthew sat us down and told us that he would like Mitchell to start living with him and Julie full time. I could tell that Julie was not happy with this decision. She barely interacted with the baby. In fact, she preferred to steer clear from him altogether. I was against this because Matthew had no experience raising a baby and he didn't know Mitchell as well as he thought he did. All his life, Mitchell was raised by his mother and Matthew played no part in it, and here he was, willing to completely take charge. Moreover, his then fiancée Julie was definitely not willing to take on the responsibility of raising this child. I felt that they were making a very rash decision. Things like this needed to be discussed thoroughly and not made in the heat of the moment. But Matthew was very adamant. He said that Julie was pregnant, which came as a shock to us, and that he wanted to start over. He had been a pretty bad father to Mitchell, and he wanted to redeem himself, especially with a new baby on the way. This was the reason why he got a new job. Mitchell started living with his dad and Julie, and initially, everything seemed fine. Matthew was trying hard to get to know his son, which was good. But Julie, as usual, tried to find excuses to send Mitchell back to my place, asking if I could babysit or take him on play dates because she was going through a hard pregnancy. This might have been true. She was pregnant with twins, but she put no effort into parenting Mitchell. Julie gave birth to twin baby boys a few months later, and that's when things began to drastically change. Mitchell was living full-time with his parents and was a few years old. He was excited to have two new baby brothers to play with and was overjoyed to see them come home. I decided to stay over at Matthew's house for a few weeks to help them out with Mitchell and the babies. And that's when I truly found out just how vile Julie was to Mitchell. She never gave him food even when he said he was hungry. She yelled at him for watching TV, telling him that he was making the babies cry. She didn't console him when he cried, and she didn't give him any love or attention whatsoever. Mind you, he was just a kid, and he could sense her dislike for him, especially when he saw how differently she behaved with her own kids. What annoyed me even more was that my brother could also see how she was treating Mitchell, but never said a word. I brought this up to them at dinner after observing her for a bit. The both of them vehemently disagreed with my accusations, saying that they were just tired and it was difficult giving all three kids attention. Julie also said that Mitchell was a brat and often acted out for attention, and she was trying to teach him a lesson. I was taken aback by these accusations because they were completely untrue. Mitchell was not a brat. In fact, he was very sensitive and sweet. He had been through an extremely big change after the death of his mother and was quote-unquote acting out only because nobody at home seemed to even care about his existence. The months passed, and I noticed that Mitchell was getting more and more neglected as the days went by. He was such a happy, talkative, energetic boy, and now, whenever I visited, he seemed like a completely different child. Both Matthew and Julie seemed to disregard this alarming change in behavior, and it was obvious that the twins were their main priority. One evening, I got a phone call from Julie, who was absolutely frantic on the other side. She told me to come over as soon as I could. I rushed to her place only to find the house in a mess. Julie was clutching one of the twins while screaming at Mitchell, who was weeping uncontrollably on the floor. As soon as she saw me, she told me that I had to take Mitchell with me and that he couldn't stay there anymore. She said that Mitchell was an ungrateful child and always wanted attention. And when he didn't get attention, he would quote-unquote attack his brothers by pinching them or pulling their hair. Today, while she was in the bathroom, Mitchell, in a quote-unquote fit of anger, pushed one of the twins from the baby bouncer chair. My heart broke for Mitchell. He looked terrified with tears streaming down his face, absolutely traumatized by Julie. I picked him up and asked him if this was true, and he told me that he was trying to sway the baby's chair so he would fall asleep, because he had seen his parents do this before, and the baby slipped out. I tried to console Mitchell as best as I could, but he only wanted his father. By the time Matthew arrived, both Julie and I were yelling at each other. I was appalled at the way that she treated Mitchell, and Matthew started yelling at me and told me to mind my business. When Mitchell ran to him and cried, he told him to shut up and ran to see the baby. Mitchell looked devastated. This was it for me. I couldn't stand the thought of leaving Mitchell there anymore. They didn't want him, nor did they deserve him. Mitchell started living with my parents and me full-time from the age of 5. Surrounded by people who actually loved him and cared for him, made all the difference in the world. We tried to give him everything that he needed, especially to make sure that he knew how loved and wanted he was. I was unmarried and had no kids of my own, so in a way, Mitchell was my son. I could never replace his mother, but I tried my hardest to be there for him no matter what. He deserved a good childhood and a stable home, and we could provide that for him. As the years passed by, Mitchell would go over to his dad's place on weekends. He used to be so excited to meet his siblings and his dad, but couldn't understand why he couldn't live with them. Matthew would make promises to Mitchell about taking him to the movies or the water park, only to say that something urgent had come up and he couldn't do it. Julie ensured that Mitchell barely got a chance to interact with his siblings. She would not let him play outside together, or even speak much for that matter. Every time, Mitchell would go over with excitement and come back home disappointed. Mitchell looked up to Matthew in all ways. The one thing that he craved from his father was some sort of acknowledgement and validation. Matthew was his hero, and whenever Mitchell got even a morsel of his attention, he was the happiest kid in the world. My brother, on the other hand, did the bare minimum. As Mitchell grew up, he started becoming a wonderful boy. He was smart and proactive, adored by his teachers, extremely social, and truly a great kid. He made me so proud whenever he won a prize or got recognized for his academics. This boy had been through so much in his short life and still managed to persevere. By the time Mitchell was 17, his father and his family had mostly no contact with him. I genuinely believed that once the twins grew up, they would reconcile with Mitchell and see just how unfairly he was treated. But that never happened. In fact, they acted snobbish and looked down on him, and wanted nothing to do with him. Mitchell kept wondering why his siblings hated him so much, and even asked me a few times, but all I could do was reassure him that everything would soon get better. Things weren't going well for Matthew either. He had lost his job and spent most of the time at home while Julie worked part-time. I noticed about 3 months ago that Matthew had been chatting with Mitchell. I had no idea about this. I only came to know when I saw the text messages on Mitchell's phone. When I asked him about this, he told me that he had been speaking to Matthew for a few weeks now, ever since he lost his job. Apparently, Matthew told him that losing his job gave him another reality check and made him realize just how awful he had been on Mitchell. He said that they still had time to mend their relationship, and he would try his best from now on to be a part of Mitchell's life. I could read between the lines. There was definitely something fishy going on. If Matthew really wanted to reconcile, why would he do it secretly? The days passed by, and Mitchell was visiting Matthew almost daily. I was extremely apprehensive. I would accompany him sometimes, and I saw that not only Matthew, but Julie and the twins were treating Mitchell well. Everything seemed too good to be true, but Mitchell was over the moon. He had never been treated with kindness in this house, and like I mentioned before, he craved validation from his father. They were planning on going for a father-son fishing trip the weekend before Mitchell's birthday, and Mitchell was very excited about it. This was the first time he was doing something exclusively with his father. I still felt like something wasn't right, but I didn't want to dampen the mood. It seemed like Mitchell had a wonderful trip, and once he was back, we started preparing for his 18th birthday. This was a special birthday because this was the last one he would spend at home before going off to college. I wanted to make it extra special, so I invited all his friends and family. The night before his birthday, while I was cleaning his room, I saw that he had multiple text messages from Matthew talking about a money transfer. This was when my worst suspicion turned true. We had been adding money to Mitchell's savings account even before he had turned 1, and by now, we had collected a significant amount of money that could put him through college. We were even planning on buying him a car by adding some more money, and here was Matthew, who didn't contribute a single penny, trying to take his son's money. It all made sense now. Why did all of them suddenly want to be a part of his life? Why did Matthew take him on a quote-unquote fishing trip? They were just using Mitchell, and I could not stand it anymore. I rushed to Matthew's place to confront him, and after a while, he admitted that he wanted Mitchell's money. He said that things had been extremely tight since he lost his job, and he needed the money to pay for the twins' education. He also wanted to buy them a car. He said that he knew that Mitchell's account would have collected a significant amount of money by now. He also knew that Mitchell would do anything to please him, including giving him the money, and Matthew's plan had worked. Mitchell had agreed to give him all the money. I was shell-shocked. How could my brother be this heartless towards his own child? I started yelling at him. I told him that Mitchell needed that money for college. It was rightfully his, and Matthew was just using him like he always has. I was too angry to even speak. I didn't want to hear any explanations, so I told him to stay away from Mitchell and not come to tomorrow's party, and stormed off. I didn't want to spoil Mitchell's birthday, so I decided to speak to him about this after. The next day, I tried my best to not think about Matthew and focus on Mitchell instead. I baked him a cake and made a few snacks for the party. Once the guests started trickling in, I was surprised to see Matthew along with his family. I had specifically told them not to come. Mitchell was overjoyed to see them and excitedly introduced them to all his friends. They didn't even have the courtesy to get him a gift. I tried to keep my eye on Matthew during the party, and at one point, I caught him sneaking off with Mitchell. I knew what he was up to. He probably wanted to know when he could get the money, and Mitchell was so gullible that he would give up the money in a heartbeat. I followed them, and once we were out of earshot of everyone else, I took Mitchell aside and decided to tell him everything. Matthew started protesting, but I didn't stop. I told him about how his father never really cared for him, how he was never an active part of his life, and now he practically gave him up to me so that he could focus on his new family. How Julie had been no help at all in trying to mend their relationship, rather she enabled Matthew to be a terrible father to him. I knew my words were harsh, but Mitchell had to know the truth no matter how hard it was for him to hear. I told him the only reason his father had come back to his life and was being good to him these past few months was because he was broke and didn't have money to support his family. He knew about Mitchell's savings account and also the fact that he was an easy target. I also told him that his father was planning to use this money on his other children and not spend even a dime on him. That's when Mitchell told me that Matthew had promised to buy him a new car for his birthday. He said that he needed the money to make some arrangements and would return it within the month. He also said that Matthew promised to take him on vacation with the money and that he had no clue that the money was going to be spent on the twins. At that time, my brother seemed like the most vile person on the planet. I don't know how he could stand there and not even look apologetic or embarrassed. I hugged Mitchell and told him that his father was just using him. He was never going to use the money on him and was never planning on returning it back either. Mitchell looked at Matthew, and I could tell from his face that he was hoping everything I said was untrue. But Matthew couldn't even defend himself. He just left. I knew that Mitchell was heartbroken. This was the last thing I wanted to do on his birthday, but he had a right to know that he was being used. He deserved that money. It was his, and it did not belong to his disgusting father. I know that Mitchell was hurting more not because of the money. In fact, that was the last thing that he was worried about. The thing that stung him the most was that his father only saw him as a person when he had money. That was it. That's all he was to them. Matthew has tried to get in contact with Mitchell these past few days, but Mitchell says that he wants nothing to do with them anymore. Now Matthew and his family blame me for everything. I still think I did the right thing. So am I the a-hole for telling my nephew the truth? Hello, it's been a few weeks since the incident. Mitchell is still heartbroken, but he's trying to move on. He has decided not to give any money to his father and focus on getting into college instead. Matthew has called me several times and called me some very nasty names. He blames me entirely for quote-unquote manipulating Mitchell and destroying the family. He says that he can't get a job because I gave him a bad reputation and totally not because he's lazy. He also said that he didn't have any money to pay for the twins' school and they were on the verge of being kicked out, and that Julie was furious with him and threatened a divorce. I told him that I didn't do anything wrong and that if he wanted to look after his family, he should get off his backside and get a job instead of literally stealing money from his son who he did not care about. I reminded him of just how terribly he had treated Mitchell his whole life, and I'd be damned if I let him use him again. I also told him that if he ever tried to get in contact with Mitchell again, I would contact the police. Matthew did not listen to my warnings. He showed up at my house yesterday, begging to see Mitchell. I forbade him, but Mitchell was gracious enough to hear him out. Matthew went on and on about how he was very sorry for being an absent father and how he loved Mitchell and wanted a second chance. He said that he was sorry for lying to Mitchell about how he was going to use the money, but he genuinely did want to be part of his life and promised that he would never do anything like this again. I could tell Mitchell was going soft, but Matthew then proceeded to beg Mitchell to give him money. I couldn't believe this man. After everything that happened, he still had the audacity to ask for money. When Mitchell refused, Matthew started yelling and crying and blaming Mitchell and me for everything. He even tried to slap Mitchell, and that's when I couldn't take it anymore. I told him to leave immediately or I would call the police. As he left, he called us ungrateful and heartless people. I expected this. He thought he could win Mitchell over with his crocodile tears, but now we all could see his true colors. Mitchell is doing okay. He now truly sees his father for who he is and wants nothing to do with him, and neither do I. Hello, I have some good news. Mitchell got into college. We're all so happy and extremely proud of him. He starts in the fall and he's extremely excited to start this new phase of his life. We're buying him a car this weekend, nothing fancy. It's a second hand, but I can tell you that he's grateful. It's been around 2 months since the last update. Before I get into it, I want to thank everybody on here for their support. It means a lot. Even though I told Matthew that I would call the cops if he tried to contact us again, that didn't stop him. He came back again a week later begging us to let him in. This time we didn't wait to hear him out, and we didn't let him in either. He stayed outside the whole day yelling that he was sorry, but we all knew what he wanted. Once he finally left, we filed a restraining order against him. This was something I never wanted to do, but it had to be done. Matthew would never take no for an answer. He has tried calling a few times. The first few calls were just him screaming at us for having the audacity to file a restraining order against him and separating a father and son, and the next few calls were him apologizing. At this point, we were used to this cycle, and it didn't affect us anymore. He hasn't visited since, and we have kept contact to a minimum. Mitchell is officially at college. We moved him in yesterday. He has his own dorm room, and we met his roommate who seems like a nice boy. He even took his car with him. I went with him to orientation, and I'm so proud of how well he's doing. I know that he is a bright boy with an even brighter future, and things are only looking up from here. Thank you for all the well wishes on the previous posts. We still have a restraining order on Matthew, but we haven't spoken to him in months. Last I heard, he finally got another job and was getting his act together. I met the twins a couple of times and they seemed to be doing okay. They told me something that wasn't surprising. Apparently, their mom had been telling them all sorts of lies about Mitchell, about how his mother was a drug addict and how he himself was mentally challenged and of a quote-unquote violent nature. She practically forbade them from seeing him. I don't think I'll ever be able to have a civil relationship with Matthew again, but I am happy that he's trying to do something to help his family. For now, both Mitchell and I plan to stay away from him as much as we can. And that was a wrap up for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Go ahead and smash the like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.